Hello, everyone. I would like to share a chapter of a book with you. The book I am sharing is Stories of Resistance, Learning from Black Women in Early Care and Education. And in particular, I am going to share the chapter on the word rooted. And this chapter is written by Teresa Lanier. Part of why I'm choosing to share this particular chapter is because the word rooted is one that I connect to. So this book is a collection of stories of educators, women of color working in early care and education, telling their story. And each story is written around a certain word or concept. And what appealed to me or what drew me about this particular chapter is the word rooted. And part of that is because for me and my journey and thinking about where I've been and where I'm going, I have often felt a lack of rootedness, a sense of not belonging, a sense of not having a home. Of where I've lived in lots of different places. I've been very fortunate to travel around the United States and be able to spend time in most of the states across this amazing country. Yet there's not really a specific place where I feel rooted or I feel home, right? And part of the story that Teresa tells is her experience of finding a sense of rootedness, a sense of home. So I'm going to go ahead and share her chapter and her story. This begins with a poem titled Where I'm From. I am from the elements unknown as to my beginning, but appears to be the sharecropper connected to the reds, and the peoples of greatness who inhabited this land before Columbus made his so-called discovery. I am from the peoples of greatness, from the place where all people kind sprung forth, only to be stolen and forced to build this country under the heavy blanket of enslavement. I am from the mixture of tastes of fried eggs and bacon encased in buttery grits, swirling around in my mouth. I am from the bright red, blue, green, and yellow lights dancing magically across the dark sky, hovering over the crisp, white, glistening powder as it lays upon the frozen land, and in the summer, the sun shining brightly at midnight. I am from the Dominus Vobiscum et cum Spiritu, and Father bless me, for I have sinned. Feeding my brain and soul with the knowledge that evokes, you are a credit to your race mentality. I am from where do I come from, pulling me in all directions, while 6 lifelines keep me grounded in motherhood. The 14 verses contributing to the song of grandmotherhood, and now the heartbeats of 5 that grant me great grandmotherhood. I am from the power of those who came before, who erased my doubts of my existence, who fuel my resistance, and who guide me in the creating gifts of love for the future. A story, my story. I began my master's thesis, Umoja, the unity that brings us together. I think and feel that it is important to hear the stories, for in the stories are the histories of the people, their struggles and their triumphs, their resistance and their oppression, their battles won and their battles lost. Within their stories lay the answers to many of life's questions. Their journeys provide pathways to follow and pathways to avoid. But before I can truly listen and hear their stories, I must listen to my own story. In hearing my story, I gain the clarity of self and can see the paths taken to reach the person that I am today. It is important to me as a person of color to pass on to others the wisdom of the seasons of life, the lessons I have learned, and the knowledge I have gained. So we begin a story, my story. I was born in Bremerton, Washington on October 20th, 1943. My mother had a great story about her pregnancy and my subsequent birth. Mama was a great storyteller. My mother was born on a reservation in Idaho. Her mother was of mixed race, but met the blood quantum to be registered in the Blackfoot tribe. Her dad was a merchant marine from the French Barbados Island. When she was young, her large family moved to eastern Washington and were migrant farm workers. She told many stories about her experiences. My father also came from a large family, which originally migrated from Alabama to Louisiana and were sharecroppers. My father had a beautiful voice. He sounded like Brooke Benton and really wanted to be in the entertainment world. Unfortunately for him, his father, being a minister, frowned upon such a vocation as being in the life of the devil. As soon as he was old enough, my father moved north and joined the military. He served in a segregated military and was discharged from service after he struck his commanding officer for calling him boy. This was not the first nor the only time that word and others fell upon my father's ears. There comes a point where one is tired of walking away. The United States purchased the Alaska Territory from Russia in 1867 with the intent of mutual benefit for both parties. Gold was discovered, and with World War II, many men headed north to Alaska to search for gold and construction work that was available with the building of the railroad and the Alaskan Highway. My father left in search of work, and my mother and I followed by ferry a few months later. I was a little over 2 years old. We moved to Fairbanks after living in Juneau. Fairbanks was and is considered the Golden Heart of Alaska. And when we moved there, it was a small pioneer town and gateway to finding gold in the streams and the mountains. My physical presence was newsworthy as there was an article announcing to the town that Teresa Lee Coleman, daughter of Beatrice and Robert R. Coleman, was the first colored child living in their town. The dearth of colored people, the dearth of colored families and children living in the Fairbanks area created a mirror in which I saw all children, white, Negro, and Alaska Native, looking similar in the wintertime. In the coldest months, children were all snuggled and bundled up in their winter clothing, through which only a small part of their faces was visible. In the summertime, everyone's skin reflected different shades of brown as the children tanned under the long summer sun-filled days and nights. The majority of the population was Alaska Native peoples of several nations who were living off the land as their ancestors had done for decades. The dominant white cultural influence and its so-called civilization, which was imposed upon these Native people, was reflected in rates of disease, alcoholism, the raping of the land's wealth, the missionaries' diligence in saving these poor savages' souls from damnation, and yes, in racism. We lived in a cabin until my father built our house. I went moose and caribou hunting with him every fall. We ate lots of salmon, wild rabbits, bear, and buffalo. My mother planted a huge garden every summer. My sisters and I had to do the weeding, and she canned vegetables and made jellies with the fall berries we collected. Being part Native provided my mother a place at the table with the other Indigenous women. where she had the honor to learn to use sealskin when making our parkas and mukluks, along with beautiful beadwork. Fast forward, in 1969, I was homeless with 3 small children. It was the Vietnam War era, and my husband fled to Canada while we were visiting his family in Chicago, leaving the children and me to fend for ourselves. My firstborn was enrolled in a summer Head Start program, and as the door of my marriage closed, the door of opportunity opened when I returned home to Alaska. I took a position as a parent aide at that Head Start program, working with 3-year-olds. It was a far cry from the age group I was intending to teach, middle schoolers. I blossomed and flourished within this environment. I took classes in early childhood education and moved from parent aide to teacher assistant to their children's care and education. Oh, sorry. I took classes in early childhood education and moved from parent aide to teacher assistant to teacher and finally to master teacher. I loved how involved families were in their children's care and education. This held me accountable for providing the best nurturing learning environment where all felt visible, valued, and validated. My code of ethics was the values and morals that my parents instilled in me. Be humble, keep your word, have integrity, be honest, and practice what you preach. I strove to be a reflective practitioner, continually assessing areas of personal growth and creating skills and abilities that would benefit the children, families, and communities I served. I was able to get my 2-year degree in between giving birth to 2 more children. With the birth of my 6th child, I decided to stay at home, and I became a licensed family child care provider. On the brink of a second divorce, I felt like a complete failure. I sank into depression. My sense of self and the related confidence was flushed away when my husband walked out of our marriage. My mother passed away a few months later. My economic situation now required me to become gainfully employed in order to support my family. But the employment I secured was not working in a community of young children and their families. My world was topsy-turvy. My children were the light at the end of the tunnel. They drew me out of my funk and down the path of self-discovery. From this process of metamorphosis, I emerged a beautiful butterfly. In 1986, I made a life-changing decision to move to Seattle, Washington. I left Fairbanks behind with encouragement from my friends and the doubts of my ex-husband that I could make it on my own. I drove through a blizzard in the mountain pass in the dark of night to reach Haines Junction. From there, I took the ferry through the Inside Water Passage and arrived in Seattle on Halloween 1987. The trip had a symbolic meaning for me as it was completing the circle. I was returning to the home of my birth in the same manner that I had left. I was to begin a new life after living in Alaska for more than 40 years. I was home and had come full circle. When I reflect on my personal and professional life, I can see that there was a design and purpose in the journey that followed that deepening my development of self. I have found that nothing happens by chance, as there are always opportunities where one can self-reflect on lessons learned. My experience with racism in Alaska was direct and overt, while what I experienced in the Pacific Northwest was hidden and covert. There were several opportunities that provided me with a frame to build upon my own self-development and further the work that I would do within different communities. I forged authentic relationships with others in the field and sought out and created strong networks that moved the agenda to positively impact the quality of services and resources designated for children, families, and communities. The work that I did was in support of all children and their families, particularly children and families of color. I got a position at a co-op program in Seattle's University District, where I was the lead teacher of a classroom of early 3-year-old children. Many of their parents or family representatives volunteered in the classrooms as assistants. I loved this as it was so similar to the work I had done with the Head Start program in Fairbanks. One of my parents was a student at Pacific Oaks College. She was unable to attend a class that weekend and encouraged me to go in her place. The door opened and beckoned me to enter. That weekend, I found myself in the company of a diverse group of people who became close friends, colleagues, and allies. That weekend, I experienced engaging with my first instructor of color. I talked openly about issues that impacted me as a woman of color with others, both people of color and European Americans. The world shifted. It was during this time, 1990, that I became part of a group of African American professionals concerned about the quality of care and education and access to resources for African American children and their families. We wanted to create change. The process for empowerment and leadership development, which resulted from our collective efforts, enabled the group to co-author and publish with funding from the National Black Child Development Institute. The result from our research project and the implementation of the action agenda items. We still meet monthly and are engaged in issues impacting African American children and families. Our collective effort was a model for other culturally specific communities to come together and engage in a similar process and subsequently publish their findings and action agendas on behalf of their communities. At different times, the group received funding from state, county, and city systems in order to implement their action agenda items. Around this time, Lewis Derman Sparks was developing a 3-year research project on anti-bias education leadership with 3 sites. I and several of my colleagues applied to participate and were selected for the Seattle site. From this project, opportunities arose for us to explore and investigate our cultural histories and work with diverse communities and programs around culturally relevant and anti-bias issues. Not long after, 1992, I became the director of special projects at Child Care Resources, through which we had received grant funding for a systems integration project. I noticed something about the conversations on systems integration. We were not engaging in the institutional constructs that were impacting the quality of life for our children, families, and communities. Instead, the system seemed to blame the victims and overlook or diminish these individual acts of discrimination and bias. I was tired of this framing of our experiences. While attending the National Association for the Education of Young Children conference in New Orleans, a reception was hosted by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, a national training organization. I had researched the organization and I invited the training team to come to King County and provide trainings for 100 people addressing undoing racism, as this was impacting the quality of life in our community. I was tired of talking nice and wanted those of us touching the lives of children and families to get real. What is racism and how can we undo it? What role did we play? The People's Institute's theory is that racism has been systematically constructed and therefore can be deconstructed by understanding the history from which racism comes, how racism works, how and why racism is kept in place, and the interdependence of racism and classism. We learned strategies for organizing to change the dynamics as our county took on the challenge. The opportunity to complete my bachelor's and master's degree at Pacific Oaks College as part of a cohort of students of color came at the most opportune and appropriate time. The cohort allowed all of us to build upon and nurture our sense of self, our confidence, and our competence while going through a higher education learning institute in a system that historically and traditionally did not support students of color. I wrote a paper reflecting on my experience titled Rocky Road, and I Don't Mean the Flavor, a student's reflection. In it, I wrote, It was a beautiful, warm, sunny day, and I was nervous, very nervous. As I stepped from my car, I told myself to breathe. Breathe deep, deep breaths. More and more cars were pulling up to the curb and parking, with the people then exiting their vehicles and entering the school's gymnasium. I did it, Mom, I said as I looked up towards the sky. It was June 12th, 1999, the Pacific Oaks College Northwest graduation celebration. I and others had completed our various program requirements, and now with our families, friends, and community members, allies, and peers present, we were preparing to receive our official rewards for the fruit of our labor. I delivered a speech that day on behalf of the master students. My 6 children were present in the audience, and I placed my gaze upon them as I spoke. At the age of 56, I officially received my degree, a Master of Arts in Human Development with a specialization in bicultural development. When I reflect on my journey during these specific time and space, I can see the stepping stones that fueled me, propelled me, and held me accountable to the work that must be done. The claiming of who I am and development of my own cultural identity. Having the clarity of who I am as a woman of color moved me to what Antonia Darder calls cultural negotiation. I am bicultural, and I know how to navigate within the dominant society. I know the rules of the game and can speak the language. I always bring who I am as a cultural being and negotiate within that context. The finding of my voice as a confident and competent professional. Even as an extreme introvert, my confidence and my knowledge and expertise moves me to speak on issues I find meaningful and essential. My participation in collective efforts for social change. Engaging in collaborative efforts and organizing keeps the issues up front and visible. These have created within me a thirst for knowledge and desire to expand on these areas. As an elder who just turned 77, I know and understand that I am a lifelong learner. My window is wide open, so bring it on. And so then the chapter ends with 4 reflection questions. 1. Teresa described a childhood in Alaska where she was the minority, yet seemed to be celebrated as new and unique. How was her experience among Alaskan natives similar and different from the experiences many Black and Brown children have living in communities that do not reflect them? 2. Even though she faced hardships, Teresa was able to do extraordinary things, and her list of accomplishments is long. What role did her connection to early childhood education, Head Start in particular, play in her success? 3. Teresa mentions that she graduated from a cohort from Pacific Oaks College that was composed of all students of color. Why do you think that such a cohort existed? What benefits might students of color receive from being in a group like that? And 4, Teresa describes the stepping stones that fueled her, propelled her, and held her accountable to the work that must be done. Reflect on some of the stepping stones in your own life.